And we are recording now.
Hello. This is episode 2, and we're going to talk about asexuality and transgenderism and try to define some terms and clarify some things to help people understand a little bit more about these things. I'd like to start out by having Chastity give us her testimony about what she's gone through the years with the gender dysphoria, feeling like she should have been a girl and all those things, and then what she had to go through with medical interventions and some sexual abuse she went through that caused some of the conditions why she needed medical intervention, as well as needing to be put on hormones. And then I'm also going to have her explain the meaning of asexuality, because that applies to her as well. So I'm going to let you get started on that.
Okay, yeah. Discovering these things about myself was actually kind of an interesting process, because I distinctly remember going down to the creek. I used to go down to the creek and I would pray there, and sometimes I would scream at God about things I was angry at God about. So, and I was screaming at God, well, why didn't you make me a girl? Why wasn't I born as a girl? And I had like a big long list of reasons I would yell at God about why I should have been a girl. And that should have been a sign right then. And multiple things were happening, and at that time, I wasn't sure how much of my gender dysphoria was innate, whether how much of it was biological because I felt that way, and how much of it was just because people were treating me bad for being a boy and assuming that I was somehow evil. Because I was made fun of by the neighborhood kids. I distinctly remember how, like, when I would talk about going over to my friend Tasha's house, because you remember that, then the neighborhood kids, they were like, oh, well, you have sex with her? I was a kid. I was like 9-10 years old, and they were joking like that, and I became so repulsed at the idea of what they were saying. And so I got this idea back then, well, if I had been born with a female body, then I could be friends with girls without people trying to turn it into a sexual thing. And I think the gender dysphoria and the asexuality both interplayed, very connected in such a way, because let me explain the terms here. So, asexuality is where somebody is not sexually attracted to people, because apparently most people are. And because I am not other people, I can't enter their brain and figure out what they're thinking. Only their words and their actions can I judge to realize that I'm different than them. Where when you're not sexually attracted to people, you don't see people and think about having sex with them. And apparently a lot of people are that way. Complete strangers they don't know, they instantly start imagining doing sexual things with them. And I was never that way. Plus, at the time of my gender dysphoria, I was a young kid. This is just a little bit before puberty. I started noticing I was different. And so I had this idea that, well, I was meant to be a girl, and I could be friends with girls without it being sexual. So that was part of it. So at first, I just played it off as, well, this is just because of the way society treats me. They're treating me bad for being a man and having a friend that's a girl. And I always got along with girls better during that time because the boys were mean. The boys in the neighborhood and even in elementary school back at Lindbergh, were beating me up, so I got to hanging around the girls. Mm-hmm. The girls were nicer. They would talk and do jump rope or something, whereas the boys would just start punching me as soon as I came close. So I realized that I wasn't like the boys because I wasn't a violent jerk. So that was part of it. But now, looking back, and as I got older, as I became more of an adult, I started realizing that, no, this is just how I feel inside. It's more of just a feeling of that way, and my inclinations and my interests are just different. And I think with the gender dysphoria is that there's two things that happen. There's gender roles which society has constructed. That's one thing, is gender roles that people decide, oh, well, boys have to play with trucks and girls play with Barbies and all those types of, and what people wear. So that's gender roles that is cultural. It only applies to certain cultures. It might be different. If you're Scottish, you might be wearing a kilt, just saying. So that's cultural. But then people also have an inborn gender identity. And most people, their gender identity just happens to align with their body. So they call those people cisgender. And that cis is a Latin prefix, if I'm not mistaken, means on the same side of. So their gender identity is on the same side of what their body is.
And it's spelled CIS.
Yes, CIS. And so cisgender is the way most people are. And cisgender just means you're not transgender. Transgender is like a cross, like transportation, transatlantic, across the Atlantic Ocean. So these are just prefixes to describe whether you're on the same side or on the opposite side. So when you're transgender, your inner sense of your identity is on the opposite of what people think you are when they look at your body. And so it's a mismatch between the body and the mind, or the soul, as I like to call it. And I think people get it confused because they think that gender identity is the same as a sexuality, and it's not. Because in the case of LGBT, T is not the same as LG or B, because those are sexual orientations, who you're attracted to. Whereas being transgender is about your own sense of identity, but it doesn't have to include who you're interested in having sex with. And for a person like me who's not interested in having sex with anybody, being transgender is completely compatible with asexuality. Whereas I suppose for people who are themselves straight or gay, then their gender identity has to then mix with their sexuality, so it's hard to separate. Yeah. So I can just separate it a little better than most people to try to explain it in an objective sense.
Yeah.
Now,
can you explain a little bit about the sexual abuse and how that caused damage that made you have a medical condition that made you have to have your testicles removed, that you weren't just being weird, like I'm going to have a sex change, I'm going to rebel against the way God made me, but it was an actual medical condition that made it necessary and that you were in pain. Can you clarify a little more about that?
Yes, actually I would like to clarify. Thanks, Mom. See, I had two painful conditions going on, and part of it was caused by the sexual abuse, but then part of it was due to an injury later on in life as well. The first problem was that due to the abuse I had experienced, I had very painful erections, even from my earliest days. So when I started having erections was after the abuse. That's when it started, and I was like 2-3 years old back when that happened, and so
and I might add too, these erections had nothing to do with sexual attraction at all. Like it might be considered that in an adult, but it was a reaction to the abuse that had damaged the male organs that Chandler was born with. And so that was causing problems, and then also there were some other problems, and they were all kind of connected, with the testicles as well. So I just want people to understand why you had to have the surgery, because people think if you have to have any of this done, oh, you're just being weird. No, it was a very serious problem, and a lot of pain was involved in the situation. And also, you had such a hard time getting anyone to do this surgery, which was medically necessary. And because people were afraid that it was all about being transgender, and then they might get sued later if you changed your mind and all that. So could you explain a little bit about that struggle you went through?
Yes, I know exactly how to explain this. So first of all, yes, I had the painful erections, and that went on for many years. But then I completely crushed my testicles on my bicycle seat. I think it was in my mid to late 20s when this happened, and I was in pain. I had a testicular torsion. I now know that's what it was called. And so there were times I could be without pain temporarily, but then I would suddenly be in excruciating pain. And I was trying to get help. I had been to many doctors, people trying to say there was nothing wrong, but I knew I was feeling the pain. And I knew what an orchiectomy was because I was researching all the medical options. And one
Explain what an orchiectomy is.
An orchiectomy is the removal of the testicles. And it's the same thing they do to male dogs when they call it neutering a male dog. It's the exact same operation. They just call it orchiectomy for humans. And I knew that would solve both of my problems because, first of all, if the testicles were entirely removed, then it could not slip in and out, and then feeling that horrible pain because I could not do anything else when I was in that kind of pain.
And it also stopped the erections to have them removed, so that solved that problem as well.
It solved the problem because the testicles and even the spermatic cords, all of that's gone. And without the testosterone, without the system there, the erections can't trigger either. So it solved the testicle pain. It got rid of the erections, so that got rid of that pain. It eliminated all of my physical pain down there. And I knew it would, but I had a hard time getting medical help. Because, first of all, Medicaid, wasn't very helpful because you're limited in what doctors you can see. And they were of no help. And then I had a government job. I worked at the National Records Center for a company named Brilliant. And at that time, it was the first time I had health insurance through an employer that was something better than Medicaid. And I was trying to seek help. And I had found people. I even found this one doctor who was saying that he might do it, but then he later changed his mind. And he was also saying that he would want me to go on hormones for 6 months or whatever before he would remove my testicles. But here's the thing. I was doing it for reasons of pain, and I wasn't at that time sure if I wanted to go on hormones. I wasn't sure. I was concerned about eliminating the physical pain.
Yeah.
And the hormones only came later out of medical necessity, but it also helped my mood. It helped my emotions in such a degree, too.
So after you did have the surgery,
yes,
the doctor we had at the time recognized that because of the surgery, you needed treatment with hormones simply because if you were low in testosterone from the surgery, also that caused you to need more estrogen as well.
Yes.
And so, anyway, so you got on the estrogen, and after being depressed all your life, that estrogen did wonders for you. It worked just like an amazing antidepressant. All of a sudden, besides the fact that she was done with that pain, which helped, she actually was in such a better mood, cheerful, happy, coping better in every way. So she really needed the estrogen. And the thing is, they're trying to stop hormones from being available for transgender people. And it's a big mistake, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about really what all is really involved sometimes in these transgender situations. There's more than just one set of stories involved with individuals, and you can't just say, well, all transgender people are just doing it to be weird, and they're all bad, and we shouldn't give them what they need as far as hormones or any of that. Every individual situation is different, and it's a big mistake to just across the board say, well, no, you're not allowed to be different than the rest of our society.
Yes, and see, here's the thing about it is having some kind of sex hormones in the body is important for maintaining your bones, and it has other functions throughout the body. So since I had the orchiectomy, I had no source of testosterone or estrogen in my body naturally. So Dr. Voss, she knew that I needed to be on something. So
and see, men have estrogen too. So.
Yes. In fact, my first lab result that I had back when I was 31 or 32, back when I still had the testicles, I had low testosterone and high estrogen even back then when I still had the testicles. Now that's evidence of a possible intersex condition right there. So I thought that was interesting. But see, then after I had the orchiectomy, I had like no testosterone and hardly any estrogen in my system. So I needed to go on hormones. I needed to take the estrogen.
Yeah.
So for health reasons, because I had solved the pain problem. And Dr. Voss, she understood that, and there are people who understand that, but a lot of people, they just judge me. They just think that the reason I'm on hormones is just to change the appearance of my body. But that comes secondary to my mental health and my health in general of how I feel and whether I'm able to operate my body too.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's some scriptures I want to get into. I don't know if you, our audience knows what a eunuch is, but eunuchs are mentioned in the Bible, and they are people who have had their organs removed, their sex organs removed, because sometimes it's because they were considered like the slaves, and they were just supposed to serve everybody, but there were other reasons too. And so I'm going to read some scriptures here. Jesus talks about eunuchs in the Bible here in Matthew chapter 19, and I'm going to read 10 through 12 because this is pertinent to what we're talking about. And you might say that like a eunuch that he's referring to can be considered similar to like an intersex person who many times is not able to procreate because of their condition as well. And in the Old Testament of the Bible, it was very important to the Jews to propagate. You know, it's kind of like they were supposed to continue to populate the earth with their kind, and this was considered like a duty, and so the people were looked down on that couldn't have children for some reason. But Jesus was talking with disciples and some others about marriage, and he was mentioning how, you know, you should marry another person unless you get divorced because you know, somebody has been unfaithful to you, and then you can have another relationship. So anyway, but in verse 10, his disciples say unto him, if the case of the man be so with his wife, it is not good to marry. But then Jesus said, all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. So he was saying it's not for everybody to remain single, but then there are other scriptures that talk about people that are asexual or just not able to procreate, and that some of them choose to be that way.
Yeah.
And it's for the kingdom of heaven's sake, meaning that he also talks about how, you know, if people are married, they're always distracted by trying to please their husband or wife. And some people that feel called to stay single do so because they want to totally focus on serving God. And so they're doing it for that special reason, but it's not for everybody. It's a special gift that God gives some people to do. And so will you please explain why you chose the name Chastity to be your new female name?
Yes, the name Chastity is a special name because the name literally means celibacy. And some people of some religions, like the Catholics, for example, they take a vow of chastity. And so they vow to be celibate and usually single so that they can devote themselves to God and their religious or whatever their mission is in life. Mm-hmm. So I'm the third category, that made myself a eunuch for the kingdom of God. That's kind of what my goal was. And chastity also means purity. And what I tend to think of is, I tend to think of, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. That's kind of what I was going for with it. But also, the name Chastity also has a special cultural significance because Sonny and Cher Bono, they had a daughter that they named Chastity. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, that they no longer go by that name. They changed their name to Chaz and became a man. So there's that. So basically, I took the name of a famous transgender person. Chastity became a Chaz, and then Chandler became a Chastity. I took their old name. They didn't want it anymore, so that's what happened.
Yeah.
But also, it was suggested by another transgender friend that the name Chastity might be good, and I'm like,
yeah.
I was trying to pick out a new name, and I'm like, it's perfect. I've never regretted. I've never even thought of anything else because that's the name right there.
Right, and what's kind of cute about it is I already have a daughter named Charity.
Mm-hmm.
So then I have a Chastity now as well, and so it can be, people can maybe get those mixed up. But what was unusual, Chastity was a very popular name about the time my daughter Charity was born, and people kept calling her Chastity, and I had to say it's Charity, and now I have a Charity and a Chastity.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was a little interesting thing. But back to the eunuch situation, I'm looking up in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, something that God said about the eunuchs.
Before we move on to Isaiah, I want to expand on the verse that you just read from Matthew
okay.
about the eunuchs. So, because Jesus mentioned the three categories of eunuchs, the ones that were born that way from their mother's womb. Mm-hmm. So that refers to like intersex people that they, right from the time they were born, they were
neither male
different,
nor female,
and often they could not reproduce because of the way their body was. Now, the second category, those who were made eunuchs of men, those were the servants or the slaves. Kings would have these slaves, and they got to live in the palace as servants, but they got to eat the king's food and everything, so they had a place to live and a job, but they had to have their testicles removed because these kings did not want their servants to have the ability to get their wives pregnant. Because they wanted to make sure that their wives only had their children. So they removed the testicles of all the servants. So those were made eunuchs of men because that was a business thing. It was a strategic thing that the royal people did. And then the third category are those who are literally choosing celibacy, often for religious or spiritual reasons. There are many people of even it's usually not just Christians, but also people of Eastern religions have a special focus on celibacy as well.
So it shows your devotion.
Yeah.
To God in your own way. And so there were those three categories that Jesus mentioned. And then here's something that God said about the eunuchs in the Old Testament. Like I said, they were looked down on. The strangers that were dwelling with them, as well as the eunuchs, partly because they couldn't propagate. And like I said, that was a big deal to them back then. But this is chapter 56 in Isaiah. And I'm going to read 1 through 5, I believe. Yeah. Okay. It says, "Thus saith the Lord, keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the Son of Man that layeth hold on it, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and keepeth his hand from doing any evil. Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, The Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree. For thus saith the Lord unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths, and choose the things that please me, and take hold of my covenant. Even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place, and a name better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. So basically he's saying, I accept all people, all varieties of people. It's a matter of whether they choose to obey me or not. And he doesn't say, well, the stranger among you or a eunuch, they're not as good as you, so just shut them out. So I thought that was a very important thing to note, how God really does think about these intersex people or other people who, for some reason, are not the same sexually and able to propagate like the average person. And I just learned recently, I knew there were a lot of varieties of intersex conditions, but I just learned recently that there are 31 known intersex conditions. So there's a big variety that people sometimes have extra genitals on the outside. Sometimes they're inside so you can't see them, that are not like our both male and female parts. And we talked about this last time about the chromosomes and how there can be a variety of X and Y chromosomes which can cause someone to be both male and female. And I also heard recently, how they make a big deal about, well, God made either male or female. And if you really look in Genesis, it says God made male and female, not male or female. So you can have a spectrum of people who have both male and female characteristics, and yet they're still creations of God. And it's not necessarily, well, I just don't like being male, or I don't like being female, so I'm just going to be bad and I'm going to rebel against God. And you don't know how many times I hear preachers say that about transgender people because they don't understand. I mean, maybe there's some people like that are trying to rebel, but I doubt it. I doubt if most of them are wanting to be transgender for that reason. And so there's just so much condemnation and misunderstanding about transgender people because people don't understand about intersex conditions that have a part of it.
Yeah. And
so anyway, and Chastity already mentioned about the difference between cisgender and transgender, but they've done a study of the brains. They have a way to do like the imaging of the brains and see the different characteristics of the brains. And the cisgender brain of either male or female, they've taken pictures of that and compared it to transgender people who choose, were born male and choose to be female, or female and choose to become male. So in other words, but what they find out is that the cisgender brain of a male is close to the characteristics of a transgender female to male, a transgender person, as the common cisgender person, and vice versa is true. The transgender women's brain is the closest in characteristics to the actual female brain of a cisgender female. And so there's something to that. It does affect our brains. And there's so much more that science is discovering. all along. And years ago they didn't know any of this. Now we're learning more and more, and science is proving what the transgender people have been trying to say. And there's differences with variation with hormones and with chromosomes. If we really think about it, and we may get into that later too, this could have a lot to do with why some people are gay.
Mm-hmm.
Because they might be attracted to what seems to be the same sex, when actually they might be a combination of sexes. And so if you think about that, with all those variations of intersex conditions, how would it not affect people's hormones, chromosomes, their sexual attractions? There's so much more to it. It's a very complicated matter, and that's why we want to go through it. We want to examine the scriptures that are hanging people up about it, and just try to get a whole picture of what's really going on here today that's facing LGBT people and their allies.
Yes, and also I would like to respond to somebody who emailed me after our previous episode, because they were asking me if I'd ever been diagnosed with an intersex condition, and they were saying, it's not, intersex is not the same as transgender, and I know that very clearly, but I think there's a connection. And see, here's the thing is, to be diagnosed with an intersex condition is kind of hard to obtain that. First of all, yes, I would probably have to pay out of pocket for a karyotype test, because since it's not a medical necessity, the only time that you usually get that test done is either when they're trying to test before a baby is born, whether it's going to be a boy or a girl. I never figured out why the parents can't just wait and see anyway. but then also when people are married and they're trying to conceive children, a straight couple is trying to conceive children, and they're knowing it doesn't work, sometimes they will discover through testing that the man has Klinefelter syndrome, so has two X's and a Y, and is actually sterile, does not produce sperm, or very little of it in some cases. So that's the other time that that test is ordered by a doctor, is as part of testing why the fertility isn't there. Whereas that doesn't apply, since obviously I'm not doing that anyway. But it's a little bit harder to diagnose some intersex conditions more than other, because some can be detected with the blood test of the karyotype, find out the chromosomes, if you can afford that. But there's more intersex conditions than just the chromosomes. There's also, androgen or whatever. What are the other insensitivity? Yeah, where your body does not respond to a certain hormone, or it has less of an effect. And in that case, you may have the hormones in your system, but your body or your brain just may not register that it's there. So you may still develop physically and or mentally different than the sex that people assume you are just by looking at you.
Yeah, and last but not least, let's talk a little bit about the fact that when children are born and they have both genitalia, or they call it, what do they call it, ambiguous genitalia? Usually the doctor, sometimes without the consent of the parents even, will decide to just do a surgery to make them one or the other.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting for that child to grow up and let them know what they would rather identify as, because they know inside if they want to be male or female or present themselves as male or female. And so if you do these surgeries, and sometimes they get really messed up too and damage the person further. So I don't know. I just know that there's a lot of intersex children that have grown up really confused, and they're trying to be one gender, and then they don't know that they were born one way, and then they did surgery on them and they want to keep it secret. And the parents tell the child not to, they don't want to even tell the child, and they don't want anybody to know that their child was born different. And we've really got to get over that.
Yeah,
and be able to tell our children what's happening to them, so they understand that there's not something wrong with them, so to speak. There's just something different about them.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing is people try to discount intersex people like, oh, that's rare. First of all, it's not as rare as people think it is.
Yeah.
First of all, because they're trying to do corrective surgery so that even the parents don't know that these children are born with both sets of genitals.
Yeah.
So they're trying to hide the evidence, but not only that, a lot of times chromosome testing is done so that when they find out there's an abnormality, they can abort that child.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons it's done. So
Yeah.
that if it has an extra missing chromosome, oh, it's a defect, let's kill it.
Yeah, see, and of course we're totally against that attitude.
Yes.
But like you said, it's not as rare as people think it is. And let's say it was very rare.
Yeah.
Let's say it only like 1 in, who knows, 2 million. Okay, are we going to act like those people aren't people and don't exist? Are we going to act like, well, it doesn't matter because this is rare. This is an unusual person. So let's just act like they're not there. Let's not address their concerns. Let's just go around preaching male and female, male or female. You're either one or the other, and don't argue. See, that nonsense has got to stop, and it's time for us to speak out and say, look, there's another side to this, and this approach is just totally wrong and dismissing people, because most people don't even know that intersex people even exist. And yet they're people too, and we want to speak up for them because they're being shamed for being born a certain way, and, you know, that's just something that needs to stop.
Yes, and also let's talk about rare for just a second, because for the math nerds out there, let me make this very clear. First of all, it's estimated that 1 in 500 men have Klinefelter syndrome, is what the statistics I had read. But let's just say that 1 out of 1 million people, out of every 1 million people, was intersex of some kind. Well, 1 billion is 1,000 times 1 million, and there are 8 billion people. So if you're 1 in a million, there's still 8,000 people in the world just like you, if there's a population of 8 billion. So when we consider the huge sample size as a population, something being rare is still a lot of people.
Yes. Now, in case people have forgotten, let's reference again and define what Klinefelter syndrome is, because you just mentioned it again and how common it is. Now, it's actually more than one thing, right? There can be 2 X's and a Y, or sometimes 3 X's and a Y?
Yes, the most common variation of Klinefelter syndrome is where there's 2 X's and a Y. But there are some cases where there's 2 X's and 2 Y's and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Stuff like that happens, and so
these people really are both male and female.
Yeah, because if you think
about it, has nothing to do with rebellion against God to be born in these conditions. So we need to take a second look at that whole thing.
Yeah, and if you think about it, now this makes perfect sense to my brain, but since people are being told, even though it's more complicated, they're being told that XY equals male and XX equals female, but if you are XXY, then yes, then you meet the criteria according to that limited definition of male and female. And so that's a
so
big,
you really are both.
That's a big pill to swallow right there. But also, if you think about it, what would happen to somebody who's like this? They might be so, they might be such a hybrid, they might be such a combination of male and female that, yes, they could end up being transgender and have to figure that out, but also, this could explain asexuality and bisexuality. Because if you think about it, when you're asexual and you're not attracted to anybody, or you're bisexual, you're attracted to both. If you think about it, since they have this competing sides of male and female, and their brain is partly this way but partly this way, they might look at people of both genders and they might think, you know, I can't discriminate between these two. I like them both, or I don't like them both, as the case may be.
Yeah.
You know, that's another effect I feel like it can have, because I feel like it played that way out in my case.
Right. Yeah, and I like the way my son-in-law puts it about chastity. He says, well, chastity's the best of both worlds. So it's my son and daughter combined, and that's why we call her a hybrid, because she has good qualities from both sides, and she can function in whatever role she's needed.
Yes.
And there's no problem with that.
That's right. And I just want to be clear, because one person did comment this. When my mom calls me a hybrid, it's not an insult. Just want to clear that up. It's not an insult. It's just that the way you would refer to, like plants that are, when they crossbreed two plants, for example, they refer to as a hybrid.
Yeah.
We just only mean that I'm more than one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you're a special, unique
eunuch.
Unique eunuch, and you're a new combination of plants that makes you special.
Yeah.
Certain flowers that are hybrids have the good qualities of both.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not an insult.
Yeah. And speaking of,
We like to call. Well, she started referring to herself as a hybrid.
yeah.
And thought that was kind of funny, and I thought, well, yeah, that's kind of what you are. So.
Yeah. Well, in fact, one time at Hy-Vee, this customer, they weren't sure what I was, and they were trying to refer to me as a sir or a ma'am, and I just explained it's real simple. My mother was a woman and my father was a man, and so I'm a hybrid.
Yeah, and of course that was a joke, because everybody's mother is a woman and father's a man, or they wouldn't be here.
I know.
But we have a hybrid here with a wonderful sense of humor.
Yeah.
So someone thought I was insulting you, calling you a hybrid?
Yes, yeah, that person who emailed me, they thought it was insulting. And another thing, and there's a misconception about your email address, because first of all, there was somebody years ago who said, well, isn't it kind of transphobic of your mom to have Navy Boy Mom as her email? And first of all, that email was established back when I was in the Navy, and I was known as a boy back then.
Yeah.
So that happened long before.
Right.
And that's an important part of history.
Right. And the reason I kept that email, in spite of the fact that my hybrid is now identifying as female mostly, is I was just so proud of her for even trying to go in the Navy. And at that point, she was a boy, so I made it Navy Boy Mom. And I keep that email because I want the whole world to know how proud I am that she even tried.
Mm-hmm.
She got picked on for even trying to do it, and it was courageous of her to do it. She ran into some problems there, but there weren't very many people that would even step out and try that. And God brought her through that and got her back home, but there was some good that came out of it, and she learned some things. And I will always be proud of her for even trying. And so she was my Navy boy back then, and I was her mom. But now she's my boy-girl hybrid, and I'm still proud of her, but I'll always be proud of her for trying. And I want everybody to know how courageous she was back when she was a boy. So in no way is it an insult or transphobic or any of that. That's why I'm here, trying to help clear things up and advocate for my son-daughter combination, as well as many other people who are being misunderstood and judged in very bad ways.
Yeah, and also a little word about names. See, a lot of transgender people, they refer to their birth name, their original name, as their dead name. They call it their dead name. They don't use it anymore. But in my case, my former name, Chandler, is a living name because Chandler's still alive. I've just changed to be more how I feel.
Yeah.
But Chandler and Chastity are the same person, and in all my books, this is made very clear. I'll have both names listed as the author, just so people know I'm the same person. So in my case, yes, it's okay to use either name, and my mom still has a hard time, with it, because when she's talking to somebody she hasn't talked to in years, they're not going to know who Chastity is. So she'll refer to when talking to them to refer to Chandler, because at least they will know who
Yeah.
Chandler is, even if they haven't met Chastity yet.
And I refer to him as my son, then I switch over to refer to as my daughter, because for one thing, when you've raised a boy and referred to him as your son all those years, you're not disowning that son, but at the same time, you're also not rejecting that they're a daughter, and it's hard to adjust. And I go back and forth and I use different pronouns, but it's not out of disrespect at all. It's just a mother that's trying to get used to it, and then knowing people from the past that won't have any idea who I'm talking about. And if I say my daughter, they're going to think I'm talking about my other daughter, and they're not going to, they'll say, well, what happened to your son, Chandler? And it gets very confusing.
Yeah.
And so I have to try to clarify things a lot, but it has nothing to do with me not being supportive. So I'm glad we're getting all this cleared up. So this was a longer visit with everybody, but it was important to go over some of these things and define some things and bring some more understanding. And we'll just continue to delve into important matters that, we feel like God's leading us to talk about each time.
Yes, and if anything we've said is unclear, you want to know more, leave us some comments, and maybe we can respond in the next episode or reply to you in the comments on YouTube or something like that. Because it's nice. We want feedback so that we know how to explain these things better.
Okay. Thank you.